What happens when a Sicilian mobster, with blood on his hands and lust in his eyes, claims an untouched virgin as his forbidden obsession? He doesn't just want her heart. He wants her innocence, her body, her every sinful breath. This is not a gentle romance. This is a dangerous seduction, where silk sheets burn with passion, whispers turn into moans, and innocence is devoured by the hunger of a man who has never been denied. Tonight, step into a fantasy where desire is a weapon, love is forbidden, and every kiss is a fire that could destroy them both. Welcome to the Sicilian Mobster and the Virgin, a story so intoxicating, it will leave you trembling for more. Hello, dear hearts, and welcome back to the Snap of Two Hearts, your home for love stories that will make your soul ache and your heart race. If you're new here, grab a blanket, maybe light a candle, because what you're about to hear is a tale of forbidden romance, of passion wrapped in shadows. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel, The Snap of Two Hearts, so you'll never miss the next chapter of this intoxicating love story. And remember, in the comments below, you can even help shape how this novel unfolds. Your words might just guide the heart of our Sicilian mobster. The first time Isabella saw him, she thought she was dreaming, a fantasy conjured from the pages of the forbidden novels she had secretly read beneath her blankets at night. Marco Vitali did not look like a man who belonged in the same world as her. He was too dangerous, too carved from shadow, too alive with hunger that made her pulse quiver. She had grown up hidden, untouched, taught that her worth lay in purity. But the moment his gaze claimed her across that Sicilian ballroom, her body betrayed her innocence. Her lips parted, her thighs pressed together beneath her silk gown, and her heart raced as if it already belonged to him. She could not look away. She did not want to. It was as though her soul recognized his sin and longed to be consumed by it. Marco, the feared mobster of Palermo, was not a man easily shaken, yet the sight of her, delicate, untouched, trembling beneath the chandeliers, struck him harder than any bullet ever had. He had tasted women who offered themselves freely, women who came to him knowing they would be ruined and begging for it. But this girl, this untouched virgin, she carried something he had never dared to crave, innocence wrapped in fire. Her body did not yet know pleasure, and he needed, to be the one to awaken it. When their eyes locked, his blood ran hotter than the finest Sicilian wine. He imagined her soft lips beneath his, her trembling fingers gripping his shoulders as he taught her what it meant to belong to a man like him. And though the room was full of music, laughter, and power, all he could hear was her breath catching, as if she already felt his touch. Isabella's world had been a cage, a convent-like home where men were distant creatures and desire was spoken of as a sin. Yet as Marco drew closer, she felt her entire existence unravel. Her pulse hammered in her throat, her breasts rose and fell beneath the lace of her gown, and warmth pooled low in her belly in ways she had never known before. This was no saintly flutter. This was hunger. Her innocence, her purity, felt fragile in that moment, as though his presence alone would shatter it. And strangely, she wanted him to. She imagined his strong hand cupping her face, his lips lowering to hers, his breath hot and demanding as he claimed her mouth in a kiss that would brand her for eternity. She had never been kissed, never been touched, but with Marco's piercing stare she could almost feel it, as if her body was already surrendering. Marco approached her like a predator, every step unhurried, deliberate, dripping with command. Men feared him, women craved him, and yet in that moment he wanted no one else but the trembling girl standing frozen in his shadow. His dark eyes burned into hers, promising both ruin and ecstasy. And when he finally reached her, the air between them thickened with forbidden fire. He leaned down, so close that his lips nearly brushed her ear, and whispered, "You shouldn't be here, Piccola. Innocence doesn't survive in my world." His voice was a dangerous caress, rough and deep, vibrating through her body until her knees threatened to give way. She shivered, not from fear, but from desire she could not yet name. And though his words warned her away, her body begged to stay. She turned her face slightly, daring to meet his gaze, and what he saw nearly undid him. Those ocean eyes, wide, nervous, but shimmering with a raw, unspoken longing, dared him to touch her. And he did. Slowly, his gloved fingers trailed against her jaw, then slid down the delicate curve of her throat, resting against the pounding beat of her heart. Isabella gasped, her lips trembling open, her chest rising against his hand as though inviting him closer. For a heartbeat, the world disappeared. The music, the storm outside, the glittering guests, all gone. There was only her breathless innocence, and his feral need to corrupt it. He imagined her beneath him, silk sheets tangled around her trembling body, her lips whispering his name as he claimed every inch of her untouched skin. The thought made his jaw clench with hunger. He should walk away. But as her soft gasp broke the silence, he knew he never would. The dance floor was alive with violins and candlelight, but for Isabella, it felt as though the universe had collapsed to a single heartbeat. His. Marco's hand slid lower against the curve of her back, commanding yet protective, guiding her every movement. Her body trembled, but when his chest pressed against hers, her trembling became heat. Every step they took together was like a secret vow, a silent claim. Her innocence quivered under the weight of his desire, and she knew that even if the world ended tonight, she would never forget the way his touch made her feel alive for the first time. Marco leaned closer, his lips brushing against her temple as he whispered in Italian, "Dolcezza, sweet one, you are mine tonight." The words sank into her like molten fire, stealing her breath. She had no experience with men, no idea what his world demanded. Yet the way his hand tightened around her waist made her ache with a hunger she did not understand. Her heart begged her to run, but her body betrayed her, leaning closer, surrendering piece by piece. The mobster could feel her innocence in the way she shook, in the way her breath hitched every time his thumb stroked her hip. She was untouched, pure, and it maddened him. Marco Vitali had killed men with his bare hands, had tasted sin in every form, yet this trembling girl undid him completely. He imagined tearing away the silk gown that hid her from him, kissing every secret inch of her body until she cried his name in desperation. He wanted to ruin her, but more than that, he wanted to worship her. Isabella's lips parted as he drew her closer, her body pressed to his like the final piece of a puzzle. She had never been held like this, never been looked at, as though she were something precious and sinful all at once. Her cheeks burned with shame and desire, but she could not fight it. In that ballroom, beneath the golden lights and shadows, she let herself imagine what it would be like if he kissed her, if he claimed her, if his mouth finally devoured hers and showed her everything she had been forbidden to feel. The song ended, but neither of them moved. The applause of the guests faded into a blur as Marco's gaze pinned her, fierce and unrelenting. His hand slid higher, just beneath the curve of her breast, a breath away from claiming her fully. "You're trembling," he murmured, his voice dark velvet. Isabella swallowed, her throat dry, and whispered back, "Because of you." The confession was innocent, but the hunger in his eyes turned it into a promise. Marco guided her away from the curious eyes of the ballroom, his hand never leaving her body. Every step down the corridor was a battle of control, for the mobster was not a man known for patience. His men watched from the shadows, bowing their heads as he passed, but he barely noticed. All he saw was her, fragile, blushing, trembling with anticipation. She was a temptation he could not resist, a forbidden fruit already half-bitten. They stopped in a quiet alcove, lit only by moonlight spilling through tall windows. The silence wrapped around them, more intimate than the music had ever been. Marco turned her gently, pressing her back against the wall, his towering frame caging her in. Isabella gasped, her chest rising as he leaned close, their lips inches apart. She could feel his breath, warm and dangerous, teasing her mouth with promises of ruin and ecstasy. "Do you know what happens when you look at me like that?" he growled softly, his thumb brushing against her lower lip. Isabella shook her head, her wide eyes shimmering like glass. "I want to taste you," he continued, his voice dropping to a husky whisper. "I want to be the first man to make you moan, the first man to make you forget your own name." Her knees weakened and her lips parted, silently inviting him closer. But he did not kiss her. Not yet. Marco hovered, his mouth a hair's breadth from hers, forcing her to drown in the anticipation. His fingers slid to her throat, then down to the delicate swell of her breast, resting just above her heart. He could feel her pulse racing like a trapped bird. He smirked, dark and dangerous. "Your body already belongs to me," he whispered, "even before I touch you." Isabella's breath hitched, her hands rising instinctively to his chest. The hardness of his muscles beneath his tailored suit made her dizzy. She wanted to push him away, but instead her fingers clung to his shirt, betraying her need. "You scare me," she whispered, trembling. Marco leaned in, his lips grazing the shell of her ear. "Good," he murmured, "because fear and desire often taste the same." The moment broke when footsteps echoed in the distance. A servant turned the corner, carrying a tray of wine, and Marco pulled back with the cold precision of a man trained to hide weakness. But Isabella saw it, the hunger in his eyes, the battle between control and desire. Her heart pounded, and though no kiss had been stolen, she already felt claimed. They returned to the ballroom, but everything had changed. The music was lighter now, the guests laughing and toasting, but Isabella felt as though she carried a secret flame inside her chest. Every time Marco's gaze found her across the room, that flame burned hotter. She could not drink, could not laugh, could not think. All she could do was crave. Marco sat at the head of the long table, surrounded by his men, yet his eyes never left her. His glass of red wine was untouched, forgotten. He watched the way she nervously touched her necklace, the way she avoided his stare only to fall into it again. He had taken lives without mercy, commanded empires without hesitation, but this girl, untouched and trembling, was the first thing in years that made him feel alive. Paragraph 19. As the evening stretched on, whispers began. Guests noticed the way his attention clung to her, and they began to speculate. But Marco didn't care. Let them whisper. Let them fear. He would not hide his hunger for her. He would not hide the way his hand itched to pull her into his lap and make her scream his name before them all. Isabella excused herself, her cheeks flushed with heat, needing air, needing escape. She slipped out to the gardens, where the moonlight painted the stone pathways silver. She pressed her hands to her chest, trying to steady the storm inside her. But she was not alone for long. Marco followed, his footsteps heavy against the gravel. Isabella turned, startled, but before she could speak, he was already before her, towering, fierce, eyes blazing like fire in the night. "You can't run from me," he said simply. And before she could answer, his hand cupped her face, his thumb tracing her trembling lips. This time, he did not hesitate. His mouth crashed against hers, rough and demanding, stealing her first kiss in a blaze of fire. Isabella gasped against his lips, her innocence unraveling as his tongue teased hers, coaxing, claiming, consuming. Her hands gripped his jacket, holding on as the world spun, her body melting into his as though she had always belonged there. The kiss deepened, turning from hunger to devotion, from raw fire to something tender and desperate. Marco groaned against her lips, tasting sweetness he had never known. She was pure, untouched, and the knowledge made him kiss her harder, his hand sliding into her hair, his body pressing her into the stone wall of the garden. She whimpered softly, and the sound nearly destroyed him. When he pulled back, their breaths mingled, heavy and ragged. His forehead rested against hers, his hand still holding her jaw, as though she might vanish if he let go. "You are mine now," he whispered hoarsely, "and I will never let anyone else touch you." Paragraph 25. Isabella's lips trembled, swollen from his kiss, her heart racing. Fear and desire clashed inside her, but one truth rang louder than the rest. She wanted him. No matter the danger, no matter the darkness, she wanted Marco Vitali. The garden air was cold, but her body burned from his touch. Marco pulled her against him, his hand sliding to the curve of her hip, pressing her tightly against his hardness. She gasped, her innocence shocked by the sudden intimacy, yet her body arched into him instinctively. He groaned, his lips trailing down her neck, tasting the skin that no man had ever touched. "Do you feel what you do to me?" he growled against her throat. Isabella's breath caught, her fingers tangling in his hair. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling but filled with longing. The admission shattered his control. His hand slid lower, gripping her thigh, pulling her against him with a force that left her dizzy. He wanted her there, against the garden wall, under the moonlight where anyone might see. The thought of being her first, of taking her innocence under the stars, nearly drove him mad. But a flicker of restraint remained, for though he was a monster to the world, to her, he wanted to be more. He wanted her surrender, not her fear. Marco forced himself to still, though his body screamed for release. He pressed his lips to her forehead, soft and lingering, a rare tenderness no one else had ever seen. "Not here," he whispered. "When I take you, it will be in my bed, where you can scream my name without shame." Isabella's knees trembled, her body aching with desire, her lips swollen from his kiss. She nodded faintly, her eyes wide and innocent yet filled with something new, hunger. For the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to crave. And she craved only him. The garden kiss had changed everything. Isabella could still feel his mouth on hers, the taste of danger and desire lingering like a flame she couldn't extinguish. When she returned to the villa that night, she couldn't sleep. Her body ached with sensations she had never known. Her lips tingled with memory, and her heart throbbed with the terrifying truth. She belonged to him now. Marco, on the other hand, sat alone in his study, a glass of whiskey untouched by his hand. He stared out at the Sicilian night, his mind restless, his body burning. He had kissed countless women, but none of them haunted him the way Isabella did. Her innocence was a temptation, but her courage, that quiet, trembling defiance, was what undid him. She had looked at him not as a monster, but as a man, and that made her dangerous, more dangerous than any rival he had ever faced. He thought of her soft gasp beneath his lips, the way her body had melted into him, and his hands clenched at the memory. He wanted her, but not like he wanted anyone else. With her, it wasn't just lust. It was possession. It was obsession. And deep down, though he would never admit it aloud, it was need. The following evening, Isabella was escorted back to the villa under the pretense of attending another gathering. But this time, she knew. This time, her heart pounded not from innocence, but from anticipation. She wore a simple dress of ivory silk that clung to her curves, though she did not understand the effect it would have on him. Her hair cascaded over her shoulders, and though she tried to steady her breath, she trembled with excitement and fear. When Marco saw her step into the grand hall, time seemed to stop. His men were speaking, his advisors murmuring, but their voices faded into nothing. All he saw was her. All he wanted was her. He dismissed the others with a wave of his hand, his gaze never leaving her, and when they were alone, he moved toward her with the steady, dangerous grace of a man who already knew she would be his tonight. "You came back," he said, his voice low and rough, carrying both accusation and relief. Isabella's lips curved into the faintest smile, though her cheeks flushed pink. "I couldn't stay away," she whispered, the confession trembling from her lips like a secret prayer. Marco closed the distance between them, his hand rising to cradle her cheek. He tilted her face upward, studying her as though she were the most precious thing he had ever held. "Do you know what this means, Isabella?" he asked. His breath brushed her lips, warm and intoxicating. "If I take you tonight, there is no going back. You will belong to me. entirely. Her chest rose and fell with unsteady breaths. She should have said no, should have remembered the warnings of her upbringing, should have run from the darkness in his eyes. But she didn't. Instead, she lifted her chin, her innocence burning into quiet courage. "Then let me belong to you," she whispered. The mobster groaned low in his throat, his self-control snapping like fragile glass. His mouth crashed against hers, hungry and desperate, and this time there was no restraint. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling her closer, pressing her soft body against the hard lines of his own. Isabella gasped against his lips, her fingers clutching at his jacket, but she did not pull away. She kissed him back, clumsy and innocent, yet filled with need, and that alone made him ache even more. He lifted her easily into his arms, carrying her through the villa's shadowed halls, up the marble staircase, into the sanctuary of his private chambers. The door slammed shut behind them, and the world outside ceased to exist. He set her down gently on his bed, a vast expanse of silk and darkness, and stood over her like a predator admiring his prize. Isabella lay there breathless, her dress rumpled from his touch, her lips swollen from his kisses. She looked both terrified and radiant, a trembling goddess awaiting the storm. "You're shaking," he murmured, his eyes devouring her. "Because I've never," she began, but her voice faltered. He silenced her with a tender kiss, softer this time, a promise that he would guide her. "Tonight, you will learn what it means to be wanted," Marco whispered against her lips. His hand slid down her body, slow and reverent, tracing the curves she had never allowed anyone to touch. She gasped, her back arching, and he smiled against her skin. "And you will never forget who taught you." The hours that followed were a blur of fire and tenderness. He undressed her slowly, worshipfully, each layer of fabric falling away like secrets revealed. Isabella's body trembled beneath his gaze, her innocence laid bare, yet the hunger in her eyes matched his own. He kissed her everywhere, her lips, her throat, the hollow of her collarbone, leaving trails of heat that made her whimper softly, sound that made him nearly lose control. When he finally joined with her, it was not with the brutality of a mobster, but with the devotion of a man who had found something worth keeping. She cried out softly, clutching him as her body surrendered, and he held her tightly, whispering Italian endearments against her ear. Each movement was both a claiming and a promise, each kiss a vow that she would never again be untouched, never again be alone. And when it was over, when they lay tangled together in the aftermath, Isabella pressed her face against his chest, her heart beating in rhythm with his. She was no longer the untouched girl from the convent-like house. She was his now, body, soul, and every fragile breath in between. Morning sunlight spilled across the silk sheets, painting Isabella's bare skin in a golden glow. She stirred slowly, her body still tender from the night before, every movement reminding her of what had happened, what they had shared. She turned her head to find Marco propped against the headboard, already awake, watching her with a look she could not decipher. "You're staring," she whispered, her cheeks flushing pink as she pulled the sheet closer to her chest. His lips curved into a dangerous smile. "I'm memorizing," he corrected softly. "Every inch of you, every breath you take. Last night, you became mine, and I don't intend to forget a second of it." Isabella's heart raced at his words, torn between shyness and an intoxicating sense of power. She had never been wanted like this, wholly, fiercely, completely. And though fear lingered at the edges of her mind, she could not deny the truth. She wanted him too. The day passed in a haze of stolen kisses and whispered touches. Marco refused to let her leave his side, his hand always at her back, his lips always brushing against her temple or her fingers. He moved through the villa as though parading her presence, making it clear to everyone that she was no longer untouchable. She was his. Yet beneath the romance, danger stirred. As the sun set, Marco's consigliere pulled him aside, his face tense. "Word has spread," the man said. "The other families know you've taken her. They're watching, waiting." They'll see this as a weakness, Marco. A distraction. Marco's jaw clenched, but his eyes never left Isabella, who sat unaware in the courtyard, tracing the petals of a rose with delicate fingers. "Let them watch," he growled. "She is my greatest strength, not my weakness." But even as he said it, a shadow of unease touched him. Because in the world he ruled, love was a weapon enemies could wield against him. That night, Marco returned to her chambers. Isabella stood by the window, the moonlight wrapping her in silver like a goddess. He crossed the room and slipped his arms around her waist from behind, burying his face in her hair. She sighed, leaning back into him, her body already recognizing the safety of his embrace. "They think I will destroy you," he murmured against her ear. "That I will ruin you, as I ruin everything I touch." His voice cracked for the first time, the mask of the untouchable mobster slipping. Isabella turned in his arms, her hands cradling his face. "Then let me be the one thing you don't destroy," she whispered, her lips brushing his. He kissed her then, deeply, desperately, his need for her overwhelming. They tumbled back to the bed, and once again the room filled with the sound of breathless gasps and murmured endearments. But this time, it wasn't just passion that bound them. It was a silent promise. Marco clung to her like a man starved for light, and Isabella gave herself to him not just with innocence, but with growing devotion. Days turned into nights, and their love deepened in secret rhythms. Marco would steal her away to hidden corners of the villa, pressing her against marble walls, his mouth hot against hers. He whispered filthy promises in her ear, each one making her shiver, each one awakening a hunger she had never known. And yet, when they were alone in his chambers, he was tender. He would undress her slowly, letting his hands map every part of her, teaching her body how to crave his touch. Isabella, once shy and hesitant, began to respond with a boldness that surprised even herself. She learned the ways he liked to be kissed, the words that made him groan, the touches that undid him completely. It was a dangerous game they played, lust and love woven together like fire and silk. For in Marco's world, nothing beautiful remained untouched for long. And he knew, deep in his heart, that one day someone would try to take her from him. The threat came sooner than he expected. One evening, as they dined beneath the glittering chandeliers, the villa shook with a distant explosion. Marco's men rushed into the hall, shouting warnings in rapid Italian. Isabella gasped, clutching his hand as fear swept through her. Marco rose instantly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. His eyes were no longer tender. They burned with the cold fire of a man ready to kill. He turned to her, gripping her chin gently but firmly. "Stay in my chambers. Do not open the door for anyone but me. Do you understand?" Tears brimmed in her eyes, but she nodded. He kissed her hard, fiercely, as though branding her lips with his soul. "You are mine, Isabella," he growled, "and I will kill anyone who tries to take you from me." With that, he left, his black suit vanishing into the chaos of gunfire and smoke. Isabella sank into the shadows of the villa, her heart pounding with terror and longing. For the first time, she understood what it meant to love a man like Marco Santoro. It was not only passion and desire. It was danger. It was war. And it might cost her everything. The villa's walls trembled with echoes of violence. Isabella sat in Marco's chamber, clutching the sheet around her trembling body, waiting for the sound of his footsteps. Every explosion in the distance felt like a dagger to her heart, every shout like a threat that he might not return. Finally, the door burst open. Marco stormed inside, his shirt splattered with soot, his dark eyes burning with fury. Yet the moment he saw her, all the rage drained from him. He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest. "You're safe," he rasped, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Dio mio, I was terrified they would get to you before I did." He kissed her hair, her forehead, her lips, as though reassuring himself she was real. Isabella clung to him, whispering, I only need you, Marco. Nothing else. That night, he refused to let her out of his sight. He stripped away her fear with his hands, his lips, his body, making love to her with a hunger sharpened by the brush of death. Isabella gasped beneath him, her innocence now mingled with bold passion, her fingers digging into his shoulders as she surrendered wholly to his dominance. Their bodies tangled in the sheets, moving in unison like waves crashing against the shore. He whispered filthy promises in Italian, his accent thick with desire, and each word made her tremble. She had never thought love could be like this, wild and sinful, yet tender enough to make her cry out his name like a prayer. When it was over, they lay together in the moonlight, her cheek resting on his chest, his heartbeat strong beneath her ear. Marco stroked her hair and murmured, "From now on, you will not leave my side. Where I go, you go. If they want to come for me, they'll have to face the both of us." The following days blurred with both passion and paranoia. Marco tightened security around the villa, but danger lurked in every shadow. Isabella could feel it, a cold weight pressing against her heart. And yet, when she was alone with him, the world outside ceased to exist. One evening, he took her to his private balcony overlooking the sea. The night air was warm, scented with jasmine, the moon casting silver light over the waves. Marco pressed her against a stone wall, his hands roaming, his mouth claiming hers in a kiss that stole her breath. "Do you understand what you've done to me, Bella Mia?" he murmured against her lips. "I was a king in shadows, feared by all. But you've made me crave something I never thought I could have. Light, love, forever." His confession stole her words. She kissed him back, pouring every ounce of her devotion into him, her innocence now ablaze with desire that matched his own. But forever was fragile. 2 nights later, the threat arrived in flesh and blood. While Marco was away handling business, masked men slipped into the villa. Isabella woke to the sound of shattering glass. Before she could scream, a hand covered her mouth, dragging her from the bed. Her heart pounded as she struggled, her nightgown tearing in the chaos. But they were too strong. They bound her hands and whispered in broken English, "The mobster will burn for this." When Marco returned, the villa was in shambles, his men scrambling. His fury was like a storm unleashed. "Where is she?" he roared, his voice shaking the walls. The answer came in silence, and in that silence he knew. They had taken her. They had stolen not just his woman, but his very heart. Marco's enemies wanted leverage, and they had found his weakness, though in truth, she was his only strength. His men begged him to plan, to wait, but Marco would not be reasoned with. "I will burn Sicily to the ground," he growled, loading his gun with trembling hands, "before I let them touch a single hair on her head." Isabella, bound and blindfolded in a darkened room, clung to her faith in him. Her body trembled with fear, but her soul whispered one truth. Marco would come for her. He always would. Even in her terror, she felt the fire of his love burning like a shield around her heart. And somewhere in the shadows, Marco was already on his way, his vengeance as sharp as his desire, his love as dangerous as his rage. The warehouse reeked of rust and gasoline, a hollow shell where Isabella's captors held her chained to a chair. Her wrists burned, her lips were dry, but her spirit clung to a single name, Marco. She whispered it like a mantra, tasting it on her tongue, praying it would summon him from the shadows. And in the dead of night, it did. Marco Santoro arrived with fire in his eyes and death in his hands. His men stormed the compound, bullets tearing through the darkness. But Marco himself moved like a phantom, every step fueled by rage and love. He shot without hesitation, his fury merciless, his only thought, find her, save her. The moment he saw her, time froze. Isabella sat trembling in the corner, her gown torn, her innocence tainted by fear, but not broken. Their eyes met across the smoke and chaos, and her lips parted on a sob. Marco. He crossed the room in seconds, cutting down the last man who dared stand between them. Then she was in his arms, sobbing into his chest, clutching him as though the world itself might shatter if she let go. "You're safe now," he whispered fiercely, pressing frantic kisses to her hair, her face, her lips. "I swear on my soul, no one will ever touch you again. You're mine, Isabella. Only mine." His hands shook as he untied her bonds, every knot undone like a vow sealed in blood. They fled the burning warehouse, the night sky alive with flames and sirens. Marco carried her into the black car waiting outside, his arm wrapped around her as though shielding her from the world. Isabella buried her face in his chest, breathing in the scent of smoke, gunpowder, and the man she loved. Back at the villa, the silence was deafening. Marco dismissed his men with a single look, then guided Isabella upstairs, his hand never leaving hers. Once inside his chambers, the dam of restraint broke. He cupped her face, his kiss deep and demanding, a promise that he had almost lost everything, and would never risk it again. "Tell me they didn't hurt you," he growled, his voice raw. She shook her head, tears shimmering in her eyes. "No, because I knew you would come." His chest tightened, his breath catching. "I would walk through hell to reach you, Bella Mia. And I just did." That night, their love burned hotter than the flames that had consumed his enemies. Marco undressed her with trembling hands, each brush of his fingers more desperate than the last. Isabella, though shaken, met him with equal hunger, pulling him close, whispering his name like a spell that bound him tighter than chains. Their bodies collided in passion, raw and urgent, as though reclaiming every moment that had been stolen from them. Marco kissed away her tears, his touch both fierce and reverent. Isabella clung to him, her fear dissolving into desire, her cries filling the room with the sound of love that was as dangerous as it was pure. When at last they lay tangled in the sheets, breathless and sated, Marco pressed his forehead against hers. "You are no longer just my virgin, Isabella," he murmured. "You are my queen, my everything, and I will kill 1,000 men if it means keeping you in my arms." The dawn found them still together, wrapped in each other's arms. Outside, Sicily whispered of blood and betrayal, but inside the villa, only love remained. Isabella traced her fingers over Marco's chest, her voice soft. "Do you think they'll ever stop coming for us?" Marco caught her hand, kissing her knuckles with a devotion that made her heart ache. "Let them come," he said, his eyes blazing with unshakable resolve. "I will always be there first. I will always protect you. And no matter how dark the world becomes, you will always be my light." She smiled through her tears, pulling him closer, pressing her lips against his. In that moment, despite the danger, despite the blood that stained their path, Isabella knew the truth. She had found not only passion in his arms, but a love so deep, so wild, it would consume them both forever. And for the first time, she welcomed the fire. The days following Isabella's rescue were filled with shadows. Though Marco kept her close, guarding her like a jewel, he knew the war was not over. His enemies had seen his weakness, his love for her, and they would strike again. He could feel it in every whisper of the night, in every shadow that passed too close. But even in the danger, he could not stop touching her. Their passion had grown into something relentless, as though each kiss might be their last, each embrace a promise written in fire. Marco would pull her into his lap in the quiet of the study, his hands roaming her body, his mouth tasting her like a starving man. Isabella, once timid, now met his hunger with her own, her innocence transforming into boldness, her love making her fearless. Yet when she lay against his chest afterward, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart, fear still lingered in her. Not fear of him, never him, but fear of the world that wanted to tear them apart. "Promise me something," she whispered one night, her fingers tracing the scars on his chest. "If they come for you, if something happens, you'll let me be by your side. I don't want to live in a world without you." Marco gripped her chin, forcing her eyes to meet his. His gaze was dark, burning with the ferocity of a vow. "Don't speak of such things, Isabella. Nothing will happen to me. I will never leave you. Do you understand? You are mine. I will fight death itself to stay with you." His words silenced her, but deep inside, both of them knew the truth. In the world he lived in, nothing was certain. The war finally arrived. It began with whispers in the streets, then blood on the docks. Rival families were uniting against Marco, determined to crush him by destroying everything he held dear. And at the center of it all was Isabella, the virgin turned queen who had captured the heart of Sicily's most feared mobster. One evening, as Marco prepared to leave for a dangerous meeting, Isabella clung to him, her eyes wide with fear. "Don't go," she begged. "They want to lure you into a trap. I can feel it." Her voice trembled, but her grip was strong, desperate. He pressed a kiss to her lips, slow and lingering, as though memorizing her taste. "I have to go, Bella mia. If I don't, they'll come here. They'll bring the fight to you. And I would rather walk into hell myself than let them set foot near you." Tears slipped down her cheeks as he pulled away. "Marco," she whispered, "if you love me, come back." He cupped her face one last time, his thumb brushing away her tears. "I will always come back to you." And then he was gone, leaving her alone with the silence of the villa and the pounding of her heart. Hours passed with no word. Isabella paced the grand halls like a ghost, her heart in her throat, every tick of a clock a stab of fear. She tried to pray, but the words tangled on her tongue. The only name she could speak was his. Then the sound of gunfire erupted outside. Isabella ran to the balcony, her breath catching as she saw flashes of light in the distance. The war had reached their gates. Panic surged through her as shouts filled the night. She rushed to the door, but Marco's men held her back. "Stay inside," they cried. "He ordered us to keep you safe." But Isabella could not stay. Not when Marco might be out there, bleeding, dying. She broke free and ran into the chaos, her bare feet slapping against a stone. Smoke stung her eyes, the stench of blood filling her lungs. And then she saw him. Marco stood in the courtyard, his suit torn, his body slick with blood, surrounded by enemies. His gun was empty, but his eyes still blazed with fire. He fought with his fists now, like a cornered lion, refusing to fall. And when his gaze locked on hers, time seemed to stop. "Isabella," he roared, his voice raw with fury and desperation. She cried out his name, running toward him, but before she could reach him, a shot rang out. The world slowed. She saw the flash, heard the crack, and then Marco staggered, blood blooming across his chest. "No," she screamed, her voice breaking as she fell to her knees beside him. His men surged forward, driving back the attackers, but Isabella could only see him. His face pale, his breath shallow, yet his eyes still fixed on hers. He cupped her cheek with a trembling hand, blood staining her skin. "Don't cry, Bella mia," he whispered, his voice weak but tender. "You were the only thing pure in my life, the only light in my darkness." "Don't say goodbye," she sobbed, clutching his hand to her heart. "You promised me, Marco. You promised you'd never leave me." His lips curved into the faintest smile. "And I will keep that promise. Even if death takes me, my soul will always find you." He pulled her down for a kiss, desperate and broken, a kiss that tasted of blood and eternity. The battle ended with Marco's enemies driven away, but victory meant nothing to Isabella as she held him in her arms. His breathing slowed, his strength fading, yet his eyes never wavered from her face. "I love you," she whispered again and again, pressing frantic kisses to his lips, his brow, his bloody chest. "I love you, I love you, I love you." And then, as the first light of dawn broke over Sicily, Marco Santoro exhaled his last breath in the arms of the virgin who had become his queen. Isabella's scream shattered the morning, raw and unearthly. She clung to him, refusing to let go, her tears soaking his lifeless face. Around her, his men lowered their heads in silence, mourning the king they had lost. But Isabella did not see them. She only saw the man who had loved her with a passion so fierce it consumed them both. A man who had promised her forever, and though death had stolen his body, she knew his soul remained. As she pressed her forehead against his, whispering her love into the silence, she understood the cruel truth. She had been touched by a love so wild, so dangerous, so eternal. that even death could not take it away. And though the world would remember Marco Santoro as a mobster, Isabella would remember him as the man who had given her everything. His heart, his soul, his life. Her Sicilian mobster. Her forever. The silence after Marco's last breath hung heavy, like the air itself had stopped moving. Isabella knelt in the courtyard, cradling him against her chest, rocking gently as though she could coax his soul back with the rhythm of her love. Around them, the villa smoldered with smoke and blood, but for Isabella, the world had narrowed to only him, the man who had been her captor, her obsession, her savior, her lover. His men approached cautiously, their eyes averted, their grief unspoken. They bowed their heads, for even they understood this was not just the death of a king, it was the death of a love that had burned brighter than fire. Isabella lifted her face to the dawn, her tears shining like diamonds on her cheeks. She whispered, "You said you would never leave me. And I believe you, Marco. I believe you'll find me again in this life or the next." With trembling strength, she kissed his lips one final time. And in that kiss lived both her agony and her eternal devotion. But some say love this strong does not die. Later that night, as the villa lay quiet in mourning, Isabella sat beside his body, refusing to sleep. She whispered his name over and over, her tears falling onto his skin. And then, impossibly, his fingers twitched. His breath rattled, shallow but real. "Marco," she gasped, her heart leaping. His eyes fluttered open, weak but burning with the same fire. "I told you, Bella mia," he rasped, his lips curving faintly. "Death cannot take me from you." Isabella sobbed with joy, kissing his face again and again, her hands clinging to him as though she would never let go. And in that moment, the story changed. No longer a tragedy, but a legend. The mobster and the virgin who defied even death itself to stay together. Kiss mark sparkles, and so ends the Sicilian Mobster and the Virgin, a tale of passion, danger, and eternal love that burned hotter than any fire. If this story touched your heart, if you felt the passion and the heartbreak, don't forget to like this video. Leave a comment below telling us if you preferred the tragic ending or the forever love ending. And of course, subscribe to the Snap of Two Hearts for more romantic fantasy tales. Your words, your comments, your support, they help us write the next unforgettable story of love and desire. Red Heart Fire.